To every guest who walked through those glass doors, I was just the girl who brought their drinks. That was the whole point. I'd spent 3 months learning how to disappear inside the Harrington Grand. How to move between tables without making eye contact. How to smile at the right moment and vanish at the right moment. How to carry a tray like I'd been doing it my whole life, instead of just long enough to get close to the right person on the right night. That night was a Thursday in late October. The kind of night where the city outside the windows looked like a painting. All gold light and wet streets. And inside the restaurant, everything smelled like money and expensive candles in someone else's life. I spotted him the moment he walked in. You couldn't miss him, really. Not because he was the most powerful man in the room, though he was. Not because of the way he carried himself, shoulders back, eyes scanning the space before his wife even finished handing her coat to the hostess. It was because I'd been watching his photograph for 3 months, and photographs never quite prepare you for the real thing. His name was Julian Crane. And the woman on his arm, her dark hair pinned up, a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than my rent, was his wife, Margot. They were meeting her parents for dinner. I knew that before they sat down. I knew which table they'd been given. I knew what Mr. Whitfield had ordered on every previous visit to this restaurant. I knew that Mrs. Whitfield always sent her steak back once, regardless of how it was cooked. I knew things about this family that they didn't know I knew, and I'd learned all of it for one reason. The reservation was for 7:30. They arrived at 7:22. My hands were completely steady as I carried menus to table 14. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without what happened 8 months before that Thursday. 8 months ago, I was working double shifts at a county hospital outside of Columbus, Ohio. Night shift charge nurse on the cardiac floor. Not glamorous, not the kind of job people make TV shows about. But I was good at it. I knew my patients. I knew which ones were scared and pretending not to be. Which ones needed someone to sit with them at 2 in the morning, when the fear got too loud. Which ones were going to be okay. My older sister, Bethany, had married Julian Crane 14 months before that. A whirlwind thing. They met at a conference. He proposed in 4 months. The wedding was at a resort in Scottsdale that I flew into wearing a dress I'd ordered off the clearance rack because I was still paying off nursing school. I liked Julian. Or I thought I did. He was easy to like at first, polished and warm in that way where you don't realize until later that the warmth is something he turns on and off depending on who's watching. Bethany was 31, Julian was 44. He had a company, Crane Capital, private equity, the kind of firm where they never explain exactly what they do, but somehow the money is always there. Bethany had worked in marketing before she married him. After the wedding, she stopped working. Julian said she didn't need to. I thought that was generous. I was wrong about a lot of things. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I'd just gotten off a 12-hour shift, and I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, eating a granola bar and listening to the radio when my phone rang. Bethany's name on the screen. She never called before noon. She knew my schedule. I answered on the second ring. She didn't say hello. She just said, "Mara, I need you to come." Her voice was so flat it didn't sound like her voice at all. "I need you to come right now. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell Mom and Dad. Just come." I drove 4 hours to their house in Cincinnati. When I got there, Bethany was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, wearing the same clothes she'd clearly slept in, the kind of stillness she had. I recognized it from Patience, the kind that comes after something has already broken. She showed me what she'd found. It took me a long time, sitting there at her kitchen table, while she explained it to me, to understand what I was looking at. Not because it was complicated, because I didn't want it to be true. Julian had a business arrangement with her father, with our father. I should tell you about our father. His name is Lawrence Whitfield. He built a commercial real estate company over 30 years, sold it at the right time, and spent the next decade being the kind of wealthy that lets you be generous in public and untouchable in private. He was on the boards of 2 hospitals, a children's literacy foundation, and a community development nonprofit. He coached my soccer team when I was 8. He taught me to drive in an empty church parking lot on a Saturday morning, patient and calm, never raising his voice. I adored him. What Bethany found was a paper trail. The kind that takes a forensic accountant to build, but only takes one horrible hour to understand. Julian's firm had been hemorrhaging money. Bad investments, leveraged too far, a deal in 2021 that had gone sideways in ways that were still unraveling. He'd gone to our father 18 months before the wedding. Not as a suitor. As a supplicant, he needed capital. Specifically, he needed $18 million, and he needed it quietly, and he needed it from someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Our father gave it to him, with conditions. The condition was Bethany. Not in those words. Never in those words. The documents were careful, the language clean. But the structure of it was unmistakable once you knew how to read it. Our father's investment would convert to equity in Crane Capital on a timeline that only worked if Julian remained married to Bethany. If the marriage ended, for any reason, by either party, the conversion clause triggered, and Julian would owe our father everything back, plus interest, plus penalties that would effectively destroy the company. Julian had married my sister as collateral, and our father had offered her as collateral. I sat there reading those documents and I kept thinking, she doesn't know. She has no idea. She's in this marriage thinking it's real, thinking she found someone who chose her, and it's a transaction. It was always a transaction. The two men in her life who were supposed to protect her had made her into a financial instrument and shaken hands over it. I wanted to be sick. I was sick, actually. In her downstairs bathroom, kneeling on the cold tile floor while Bethany stood outside the door asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay, but I didn't tell her that. I came out, washed my face, and asked her one question. What did she want to do? She said she didn't know yet. She said she needed time. She asked me not to confront anyone, not to do anything. She was still processing. She'd only found the documents 3 days ago. I said, okay. I said I would follow her lead. And then I drove back to Columbus, put in my notice at the hospital, and started figuring out how to get into the Harrington Grand. I want to explain why I didn't just go to our father and confront him. I thought about it. For about 48 hours, I thought about almost nothing else. I ran through the conversation in my head 100 different ways. Sitting across from him, showing him the documents, watching his face. In some versions, he denied it. In some versions, he explained it in a way that made it worse. In some versions, he cried. None of those versions ended anywhere useful for Bethany. Because here's what I understood, working nights on a cardiac floor for 6 years. The people who need help the most rarely get it by someone yelling at the person who hurt them. You have to be strategic. You have to think 3 steps ahead. And the most important thing I understood was this. Julian didn't know that Bethany had found the documents. He didn't know she knew. And that was the only advantage she had. If I went to our father, he'd go to Julian. Julian would get lawyers involved. The documents might disappear. Bethany might get pressured into silence, or pressured into staying, or worse. She might end up looking like the unstable one, the difficult one, the wife who'd gone through her husband's papers. I'd seen what happened to women in situations like that. I'd sat with enough of them in hospital rooms to know. So I thought about what I could do that our father wouldn't see coming. I found out that Julian had dinner at the Harrington Grand with the Whitfields once a month. It was practically a ritual, first or second Thursday of the month, table 14, always the same server. The server's name was Christopher. I found Christopher, and I found out that Christopher was 3 months behind on his student loans and had just been told by his landlord that his rent was going up $400 in January. I wasn't proud of what came next, but I wasn't ashamed of it either. I paid Christopher 6 months of the loan payments in advance, and his January rent increase, in cash, in an envelope, with a note that had exactly 2 sentences on it. The first sentence said what I needed him to do. The second sentence said that if anything went wrong, I'd never spoken to him and he'd never heard of me. He agreed. He called in sick the following month. I was already on the schedule as his replacement. The Whitfields arrived at 7:31. Our father came through the door first. Lawrence Whitfield, 63 years old, wearing a navy blazer and the same watch he'd worn to every important event of my life. He had his hand on my mother's back, guiding her through the door. Mom. Diane. She was wearing a cream blouse and pearl earrings, and she looked like someone's idea of a perfect grandmother, which she would have been, if things had been different. She didn't know. I was almost certain she didn't know. That was the thing that made it complicated. That was the thing that kept me awake those first few weeks, lying on the air mattress I'd set up in a friend's spare room in Cincinnati, trying to make peace with what I was doing. My mother was innocent. She loved Julian. She'd cried happy tears at that wedding in Scottsdale. She would be collateral damage in whatever happened next. I couldn't protect everyone. I kept moving. Julian and Bethany were already seated, talking to each other in the low, careful way of couples who are performing togetherness in public. Bethany had her hand on the table, not quite touching his. She was wearing the emerald earrings our grandmother had left her. She looked beautiful and composed and absolutely exhausted in the way that only I would notice, because I'd been looking at her face my whole life. She didn't know I was there. I hadn't told her. I poured water. I took the bread basket to table 14. I stood close enough to our father that I could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn since the 1990s. And I smiled at the empty middle distance the way I'd practiced and said, "Welcome to the Harrington Grand. Can I start you all with sparkling or still?" My father ordered still. My mother asked if we had the Pinot Grigio she'd had last time. Julian said sparkling, please. Bethany was looking at her menu. She hadn't looked up yet. I went to get the water. The dinner moved the way those dinners always move. The appetizers, the small talk, the comfortable formalism of a family that has nothing to hide. My father told a story about a golf game. My mother asked Julian about a project he'd mentioned the previous month. Julian answered smoothly, and he was good at it, that smoothness. I watched him across the room between trips to the kitchen, and I thought about how long it had taken me to stop finding it charming. The thing I was waiting for happened at 8:47. My father excused himself to make a phone call. He walked toward the back of the restaurant, past the bar, toward the alcove, near the restrooms, where the signal was better. I knew this because Christopher had mentioned it, and because I'd spent 2 Thursday evenings sitting in this restaurant as a guest before I ever worked here, mapping the patterns. I had about 4 minutes. I set down the dessert menus I was carrying and walked to table 14. Julian looked up when I approached, that automatic polite guest expression. My mother was in the middle of telling Bethany something about a cousin's birthday party. Neither of them were really looking at me. I leaned down slightly, the way you do when you're being discreet, and I set a small folded card beside Julian's wine glass. The kind restaurants use for special notes to VIP guests. And I said very quietly, just for him, "Sir, there's a message for you." I was asked to deliver it personally. He frowned slightly, the way people do when they're caught off guard by something unexpected in a place where they feel safe. He picked up the card. Inside, in my own handwriting, were 2 sentences. She knows, and so do I. I was already turning away, already moving toward the next table, when I heard him stop breathing. Not literally, but I'd spent enough years monitoring people's vital signs to know what it looks like when someone's body goes into shock. The stillness, the way the face goes carefully, deliberately neutral. I didn't look back. I need you to understand what those 3 months had cost me. I'd given up my apartment. I'd given up a job I was good at, and a schedule I'd built my life around. I'd spent money I'd been saving for a down payment on a house. And I'd done something legally questionable in paying Christopher. And I'd lied to my parents when they called and asked how I was doing. And I'd listened to Bethany on the phone twice a week, sounding further and further away while I couldn't tell her what I was doing or why I was doing it. I'd told myself the whole time that this was for her, that I was protecting her, that she deserved to know the truth in a way that gave her power, instead of taking it from her. But sitting in the restaurant break room at 9:15, listening to the sounds of the dining room through the door, I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure she'd asked for any of this. I wasn't sure I'd thought about what came after. The door to the break room opened. I looked up, expecting my supervisor. It was Julian. He'd found me, which meant he'd asked someone where the server had gone, which meant he was less controlled than I'd thought. His face was, I don't know how to describe it exactly, not angry. Something more complicated than angry. There was a quality to his expression that I recognized from the poker face patients, the ones who are terrified and working very hard not to show it. He closed the door behind him. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Who are you?" And I took off my glasses. I'd been wearing readers I didn't need as part of looking different, and I watched his face go through the recognition slowly, like a photograph developing. "Mara," he said. "Hi, Julian." He sat down heavily in the chair across from me, which I hadn't expected. I'd expected anger, denial, threats. What I got instead was something that looked like a man whose legs had stopped working. "How long have you known?" he said. "Long enough." "Does she?" He stopped. "Does Bethany?" "Bethany found the documents herself," I said. 8 months ago. She's known this whole time." He put his face in his hands. I didn't feel sorry for him. I want to be honest about that. I sat there and watched, and I didn't feel sorry for him at all. But I also didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. I just felt tired. Very, very tired, in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and set it down and doesn't quite know what to do with their arms. "What do you want?" he said. His voice came out rough. "I want you to listen," I said. "Because you're only going to hear this once." I told him exactly what Bethany and I had spent weeks planning. After I'd finally told her, 3 weeks before that Thursday, sitting in her kitchen at midnight, with both our phones turned face down on the table. She'd been furious with me at first, which was fair. She'd said I should have told her what I was doing. I said I didn't want to get her hopes up. We argued about it for 2 hours in the way that only sisters can argue. And then she cried, and then I cried, and then we made tea and spread the documents out on her kitchen table and built a plan together. Here is what I told Julian. Bethany was going to file for divorce. She had a family law attorney in Columbus who had already reviewed the financial structure of the marriage and identified 3 separate points at which Julian's conduct could be characterized as fraudulent inducement. She wasn't going to be quiet about those points. She wasn't going to sign anything that made her quiet about them. The conversion clause was going to trigger. Our father was going to get his money back. That was fine. That was, in some ways, the correct outcome. But before any of that happened, a copy of every relevant document was going to go to 3 people. The attorney, a trusted friend Bethany had outside the family, and a journalist at a financial news publication who had been covering Crane Capital for 2 years and would find the story very interesting. Julian could fight it. He had the resources to fight it. But he needed to understand that the fight would be expensive, public, and uncertain, and that there was another option. The other option was this. He could cooperate. He could agree to a clean and equitable settlement, one that left Bethany financially stable and protected. He could, separately, have a private conversation with our father, one that I would not be present for and did not want to know the details of, and settle whatever reckoning needed to happen between them. In exchange, Bethany would not speak to the journalist. He was quiet for a long time. "Your father," he said finally, "is not going to take this well. I know, he'll come after both of you. He might try." Julian looked at me across the table, really looked at me, maybe for the first time. "You gave up your job, your apartment. It wasn't quite a question." "Yes, for her. She's my sister." He was quiet again. Then he said, "I did care about her. I want you to know that." It started as he stopped. It started one way and then it became something else. "I do care about her." "I believe you," I said, because I did actually, in some limited and insufficient way. "It doesn't change what needs to happen." He nodded. He stood up. He straightened his jacket in that automatic way people do when they're trying to recover some dignity. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. "You have one," I said. "The attorney has a filing date." He left. I sat in the break room for another 10 minutes, and then I went back out and finished my shift. My mother called me 5 days later. She'd heard from our father, which meant Julian had kept his word. He'd had whatever conversation needed to happen, and it had been enough to shake something loose in our father's careful, controlled world. She didn't know the details yet. Her voice on the phone was careful and confused in the way of someone trying to figure out what shape the floor is before they step on it. "What's going on, Mara?" she said. "I think Dad needs to tell you some things," I said. "I think you should sit down together and he should tell you, and then you can call me." She called me back 4 days later. She cried for most of the call. She kept saying she didn't understand how she hadn't seen it, and I kept saying the same thing I'd said to 100 patients over 6 years when they couldn't understand how something had gotten so far without them noticing. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who know best how to hide things from us. It's not a failure of attention. It's not stupidity. It's love. Love makes us want to believe the best. I'm so angry at him, she said. She meant our father. I know. Are you angry at him? I thought about it. The golf stories, the parking lot, the soccer games, the careful and patient way he'd built a life that I'd believed in completely. Yes, I said. I'm very angry at him. Okay, she said. And then, after a moment, I'm proud of you. Is that strange to say, given everything? No, I said. It's not strange. Bethany's divorce was finalized 7 months after that Thursday at the Harrington Grand. The settlement was equitable, the way I'd said it had to be. She kept the house in Cincinnati. Julian bought himself a condo in Chicago and, as far as I know, is still running Crane Capital, smaller and quieter than before. Our father and I didn't speak for 6 months. When we did, finally, it was at my mother's insistence, at the kitchen table of the house I grew up in, with very bad coffee and a lot of silence, and things that needed to be said taking a long time to find their shape. I'm not going to tell you that I forgave him, because I'm not sure forgiveness is what that conversation was. I'm not sure I know yet what it was. What I know is that he looked at me across that kitchen table and said, I thought I was solving a problem. I thought I was taking care of the family. She's part of the family, I said. She was the problem you solved. He didn't answer for a long time, and then he said, I know. I'm back in nursing now. Different hospital, night shift, cardiac floor. Some things don't change. I moved to Cincinnati to be closer to Bethany, which was a decision I made at the same time. I made all the other decisions, and didn't really examine until I was already unpacking boxes in a new apartment 6 blocks from her house. She came over the night I moved in. She brought takeout from the Thai place near her office, and we sat on my floor because I didn't have furniture yet, and we ate pad see ew out of paper containers. And she didn't thank me, which was correct, because I hadn't done it for gratitude. She just said, I'm glad you were there. And, I said, I know. Outside, the city was doing its ordinary Thursday night thing. Traffic lights cycling. Someone's music drifting up from the street. The whole breathing indifferent machinery of regular life. And somewhere in that city, behind every lit window and every closed door, there were probably other families with papers they'd never shown each other, and arrangements they'd never named out loud, and the quiet violence of people being used by the people they trusted most. I couldn't fix all of that, but I'd fix this one. I'd fix this one for her. And for the first time in 8 months, when I lay down on my mattress that night in my bare new apartment, I slept all the way through until morning.